Ferrari endured yet another difficult weekend in Silverstone, in which they were able to score points with Hamilton only. The dissatisfaction of Leclerc and Lewis was heard throughout the entire race, as some of the calls from the pit wall were borderline questionable. But with the anger of the Ferrari drivers being displayed publicly again, the question arises, will the Maranello-based squad finally take action? And if so, is it already time to focus on 2026? Once again, Ferrari has shown why a total rebuild is desperately needed, especially in their internal ranks. Starting with the strategy team before the race even began, a gamble was taken by Charles Leclerc, who believed the track was dry enough for slick tires, a decision that ultimately did not pay off. After the very first lap, the Monegasque confirmed the track was still too wet for slicks. Meanwhile, Lando Norris was informed that George Russell, who was poised to start at P4, had also taken the same risk and it was clearly not working, as he was way too slow compared to the front-running pack. Then came a safety car period shortly after, and Leclerc decided to abandon the brave strategy and pit for intermediate tires. However, this already meant a huge blow to his race, as the initial gamble backfired, and he couldn't climb a significant number of positions before the rain began to fall even heavier. While talking to his race engineer about the car's balance, Leclerc stated, "The rear is hotter than the front. We need to work on this. Maybe we can talk at the end of the race. I'm receiving conflicting information and the brake balance keeps shifting. I have no idea where the brakes are right now." As Leclerc entered the last 10 laps of the race, it became evident that his final opportunity to score points at Silverstone would come during the switch from intermediates back to slicks. Alonso was the first to make the move, and Leclerc was then asked if he preferred a used medium or used hard compound tire. His response hinted at a preference for the yellow-striped medium tires, but at the end of the saga, Ferrari instead mounted the softs. Yet another example of how everything can go wrong due to a lack of clear communication. The decision did not pay off whatsoever. Leclerc struggled to keep the car on track, and in a dramatic moment toward the end of turn 15, he nearly took himself and Carlos Sainz out, damaging the front wing of his former teammate in the process. He eventually crossed the finish line in P14, and what followed was a major outburst on team radio where Leclerc said, "Yeah, that was effing bad. Sorry. I'm at a loss for words. There is a lot of work to do. I'm not even sure where I placed the car on the track. It was really difficult." Let's not forget that Leclerc had already delivered a very explosive rant after qualifying as well, where he finished P6 despite it being written in the cards that he could have secured at least a front row start. But then again, it's hard to blame anyone but himself in some parts of the weekend. And to his credit, Leclerc admitted that a fair comparison needed to be made between his own performance and that of Lewis Hamilton. At the end of the day, the 7-time world champion was still fighting up front, despite struggling to get past the Alpine of Pierre Gasly and eventually finishing the race behind Nico Hülkenberg. Expanding on his race, Leclerc said, "Slick tire at the start, the first 2 sectors were dry, and I thought it was going to get dry fast. It was a mistake, but the biggest problem was the pace. Lewis had more pace. My setup is extreme, and it pays off in the dry. The only positive is Lewis's performance. At least I'll be able to observe him and try and understand where I went wrong." And clearly, this isn't the first time Leclerc has been disappointed by his team, and it likely won't be the last either. That's exactly why the Monegasque driver made it loud and clear that he would be demanding answers from the individuals who need to be held accountable. When discussing the matter further, he added, "Part of the reason why we had a bad race was because we thought the track would dry quickly. But I'll say that the biggest part is the lack of pace today. And on that, I want the answers before going back home. So I'll work hard to try and understand what was going on there." Meanwhile, on the other side of the garage, things weren't going too well for Hamilton either. The 7-time world champion faced a lot of confusion when Ferrari called him in for a pit stop at a moment that seemed highly questionable. The decision ultimately cost him 4 positions on the grid, dropping from P4 to P8 after the first round of stops. According to reports, the main issue behind this mistake was that the GPS signal of Hamilton's car was lost. Needless to say, Hamilton was extremely disappointed by the situation, especially considering he didn't feel comfortable with the car for most of the race, and with Ferrari's repeated operational errors continuing to affect race outcomes, the pressure is only mounting further. Elaborating on his struggles to his race engineer, Hamilton didn't hold back in describing how the car felt throughout the ever-changing conditions, saying, "The car is so hard to drive, mate. It's snappy, like crazy." That first pit stop call, in particular, proved costly, effectively ending Hamilton's remarkable streak of podium finishes at Silverstone that had remained unbroken since 2014. The British driver was visibly unhappy with his team's strategic decisions. And when addressing those controversial calls from the Ferrari pit wall, Hamilton was blunt, stating, "Not all the calls were good ones. I think the first one wasn't a good call clearly because we got undercut by a bunch of people. So I'm not really sure what exactly happened there. We'll have to go back and see what happened. But I was P4 and I came out P8. So that's not good." He went on to add, "I chose to come in close to the right time, but it was super tricky when I got back out, and I lost a ton of time. I went off at turns 3, 9, 11, etc. This is something that needs to be addressed as well. Before the switch from intermediates to slicks, Hamilton was trailing just 2 to 3 seconds behind Hülkenberg. But after his tire changehand, with Hülkenberg pitting a lap later, the German driver emerged a full 10 seconds ahead, highlighting yet another poor strategic decision. This only deepens the growing concern over Ferrari's decision-making, and it raises even louder questions about whether the team behind closed doors is performing anywhere near the level they need to. One can only wonder if the drivers will truly be content staying with this team into 2025, let alone placing their hopes in the new regulations for 2026. That's why serious internal talks need to be held between team principal Frédéric Vasseur and his engineering crew. There's no question that Charles Leclerc felt extremely uncomfortable with the SF25, largely due to the massive lack of pace. In fact, he later admitted that he needs to study Lewis's performance statement that should concern Ferrari deeply, considering they finished behind the Sauber purely on race pace. For Hamilton, it was the second time this season after Spain that he's had to endure such a situation. But what this really shows is that Ferrari, as a team, still has a long way to go if they want to consistently fight at the front. And sadly, that gap might now be too big to close within the remaining races of the season. Even more worryingly, Leclerc doesn't believe the car's core problems can be solved. Before the race, he seemed confident, insisting that he and his engineers knew exactly what the issue was and that it needed to be fixed for the future. But after Silverstone, a far more dejected Leclerc emerged, admitting that they might be stuck with this issue for quite some time. While Vasseur has since dismissed this concern publicly, when addressing the issue that Leclerc had raised, the Frenchman pointed out that Leclerc refused to disclose specifics, saying only, "I have to stick to the team order. I won't disclose it. It can be fixed. But it's true that we're struggling with something." So, what's next for Ferrari? The team is now grappling with the fact that they're not properly receiving, interpreting, or acting on the driver's feedback, something that must be addressed with urgency. Hamilton, too, didn't mince words after the race, pointing to how those struggles stripped him of a likely podium. He explained, "I just struggled to keep up. The tires dropped off massively, and the car was unbelievably tricky to drive. I think ultimately, I learned a lot today. There's a lot to take from the day. It's only my second time driving in the wet with this car. It's not one that likes these conditions. I now have lots of data to take on this. For me, I'll sit down with the people who designed the car for next year because there are elements of this car that can't go into the following season." The drivers Leclerc and Hamilton alike will undoubtedly have plenty to say to Vasseur and the engineers back in Maranello, because it's clear that what they're demanding isn't being delivered. Beyond the communication breakdowns and strategic errors, they're left with a car that simply refuses to respond the way a top contender should. And if Leclerc and Hamilton, two of the sport's most skilled drivers, say, are being forced to wrestle with such an uncooperative machine, then it's only a matter of time before they bring serious pressure on the team to fix things fast. With all of this in mind, what do you think about the radio messages from Hamilton and Leclerc regarding the behavior of the SF25? And more importantly, do you believe Ferrari has a real fix on the horizon for 2025? Let us know in the comments below, and once you've shared your thoughts, make sure to click on the video that's appearing on your screen right now for even more insight into Formula One's most dramatic developments.